program might contain strong language. If you think you may be offended, switch off now.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Watch Mojo and the first Inside podcast of 2026. I'm your host, Rob, and with me is Watch Mojo CEO and co-founder Ashkan Karbstrushan, or Ashkadamas, as he's going by today, to tell us his predictions for what to expect in this year. How's it going, Ash? Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. It's like, what is it, the 7th or 8th of the month? And it's like,
Yep.
I need a drink. It's been draining, starting with Maduro. One night I was down south. I think it was after New Year. So I'm like, tonight I'll go to bed relatively early. I caught the Habs game, probably on an illegal stream, despite being a paying client. And I'm like, I'll go to bed. I wake up in the morning and I read Maduro taken to U.S. I'm like, this is crazy. Anyway, we're a week in. Iran may be undergoing possibly a revolution. It's crazy. So, I mean, again, we're not even like January.
What a way to start the year. It's been a long week, hasn't it? It's
been a very long week, yeah.
Have you made any resolutions for this year? Are you into that type of thing?
I used to be. I'm doing dry-ish January. We'll leave it at that. No, but that's every year I try to do that. No, my resolutions are actually continuations, not to get too serious, of things that I started last year, like not overthinking, being more in the moment, not worrying about things that realistically the odds of happening are like less than 1%. And yeah, but otherwise, like the things that I'd already started, like perspective and gratitude a few years ago, I've kind of maintained those. How about you? Any resolutions?
Well, it's kind of the same. It's like continuations, reminders more than resolutions. But if I had to identify one, I'd say that my goal for this year is less input and more output. So, produce before I consume, because I just feel like I should be making more stuff, whether it's like music or creative writing or something like that. I just want to produce more this year. So that's my big goal.
I mean, the reality is, I've touched on this. Human beings were either consumers or producers of content or things, and it changes, right? Like when I was young, I used to just read a lot of articles and just take it in, watch TV. And then obviously when I started media, I started to write as a prolific columnist. Then with WatchMojo, been involved directly or indirectly with so much content, documentaries, books. And it's funny because, there was a period where I went to becoming more of a consumer again, like catching up on shows. And now, again, I'm shifting back to producer. So here we go.
Yep, that ebb and flow. So let's pick it up where we kind of left off at the end of 2025, the latest big project that you've been working on. What's the latest update on your Montreal Expos revival project?
Yeah, I mean, I would love, obviously, I think we are going to talk a little bit about Venezuela and Maduro, not just specific deep dive into it. There's people that know more, but how it affects America, Canada, how it affects Iran, what's happening in Iran. Sorry, and then a little observation about private equity as we celebrate our 5-year anniversary with our private equity investors. But yeah, so the Expos, I mean, let's start like this. Last night I was at the Habs game and I was in a section which has like a kind of a restaurant for fans to go and eat before. And next to me, there was this father and dad, and kind of first half intermission, before the game, we talked about the food and the experience in the area. Second intermission, we talked a little bit about, or the first intermission, we talked about the Habs and the roster and just how amazing and what a great job the organization has done. And then at the end of the second intermission, I go, oh, by the way, if you don't mind my asking, were you ever Expos fans? And if you think they'd ever come back, and kind of open-ended question. And he's like, honestly, if they come back, I'd be the first to be buying season tickets. He's like, frankly, it's funny you mention it because he's like, I thought this file was closed, but he's like, about a month ago, I was driving and I was listening to the radio, and he's like, I heard some guy on the radio was talking about bringing them back, and I was sitting there with my daughter, and I got a bit like verklempt. I was a bit emotional. I didn't say anything. I was gonna just leave it at that, but he's going on and on. I swear to you, there were witnesses. So he's like, because I was switching back between Francais and English with him, as many Montrealers do. And he's like, and he sounded like you. And And then he was like, at the same time, he was like, was
He's
it you?
realizing.
My daughter's like, this guy. Anyway, so weird, interesting, but captures, I think, the excitement, the hope, nostalgia, but really more hope and yearning to, for lack of a better word, make Montreal great again. I think
Mm-hmm.
Montreal seeing the Blue Jays run, not just on the baseball diamond, but the windfalls that the city had with over $100 million of economic activity in the playoffs. I think Montrealers may not have wanted to admit it, but now with my, just playing my little part to push this project forward, I do think there is this collective of, excitement and growing, hope that at least we could put our best foot forward to Major League Baseball. So where are we at? This is Major League Baseball's decision. Next year, they're going to have their labor issues, collective bargaining agreement, possibly work stoppage, and that will probably lead to a new deal with a salary cap and a salary floor, meaning some owners may be like, yeah, I don't want to pay that floor. The stakes are too high. I want to sell. So there's going to be more movement. I do think Montreal's best shot is through expansion. And then the year after the CBA, obviously the league will look at renegotiating media rights. That affects revenue. And then after that, what I've read is Commissioner Manfred does want, before retiring, to kind of bring two teams through the expansion. And I won't lie, I think Montreal was probably, not in the mix. I think in the last 45 days, we've gotten a lot of traction. As I educated myself, I learned that, the era of sports club ownership is no longer about the one wealthy guy like a Jerry Jones or a Arte Moreno who goes and says, I'm worth $1 billion. I'm going to sign a check for $100 million and buy this shiny toy. It really is institutional capital plus a big anchor investment plus a few strategics and whatnot. So, being a conservative fella, I would never say, financing secured for the PE, but using the jargon of investments, I think the PE tranche will be oversubscribed. The league caps ownership of a team to 30%. They don't care about the stadium financing as much. So the PEs will probably fund even up to 100% of the stadium. So my kind of goal right now is to go and find that anchor investor, that high net worth individual or family office. Historically, obviously, MLB wants that person to be local. I may be a 5% owner. I made no claims that I would ever, have the means to be that big anchor investor. But me being in Montreal, speaking to people that know MLB a bit better, and, they're like, look, if you're bilingual, you have a track record, you're a sports fan, you have a clean sheet when it comes to governance and all that. They don't want some fraudster, joining their fraternity or sorority and fraternity, for lack of a better word. So I'm very confident. And then I didn't really try. I thought it was premature to get like an advisory group together. But, I know my strengths and I know blind spots. So in the last 30 days or even 15 days while on vacation, it's like I put something on X, which was like the WWE, when like you're like one man in the ring against 5-6 people, and then out of nowhere Stone Cold comes rushing into the ring to help you before he hits you with a chair, in the back. But so it's going really, really well. This is just comparing Montreal, the fundamentals of Montreal vis-a-vis the other cities. I wish all the cities really, really well. But I think on the merits, Montreal's size, 3-4 million population, French, that the world loves to blame everything on Quebec being French, but French is an advantage, I believe, to any league because it gives them a gateway into Europe, gateway into African countries that speak French. So ton of traction. I don't know if Yvonne, you want to bring up the Context is King link, but the other thing is like, so I didn't want to name people because I want to still be somewhat. I don't think anybody will say I'm off the radar, but I'm like kind of Mr. X, the maestro, the conductor, the chef. We got Colonel Mustard, who's like a titan of governance. The former CEO of a major global enterprise. Like, I think he brings a lot more credibility with corporate Canada, corporate America, Quebec Inc. We got the connector, somebody who is a well-known figure in media, aka Nick Fury. He is connecting me to a lot of investors. The financier, That's what I was alluding to. The PE tranche, I think, looks really, really strong. I think that 30% of the sports club, I don't think will be an issue, even up to 100% of the stadium. The banker, aka Moneypenny, one of the largest, again, like these are all very purposely arm's length, informal. I myself don't want to commit too quickly until I really get some more, kind of reassurances that, nobody's wasting their time and nobody's getting too excited. The engineer is aka Scotty, is actually my brother-in-law, who I've already alluded to. He brings me a lot of confidence in the real estate piece, connecting me to the right builders eventually. The implementer, aka Sam Y, somebody that knows, a bit early, but like somebody that would be able to figure out, okay, what does a tech-enabled, tech-powered campus and stadium and all that look like? And then, of course, we've talked about AI, but AI has been a great tool in terms of research, in terms of me just firing off emails, taking a template that I would create and adapting it to like hit up 50 family offices. And again, very premature, but like of the 50 or so outreaches that I made to high net worth individuals or family offices, I was doing this over the holidays when I was down south. I've already gotten 5 to 10 responses. I got a couple of passes saying, this is really exciting, good for you, but it doesn't fit. But I've gotten 5 to 10 individuals who are not the principals, admittedly, but they work as analysts and they work as even more like chief investment officers at some of these family offices that are like, this is really interesting, curious to learn more. But it's kind of, as I say, this racket is interest, intent, and action. And my goal is to funnel as much of these people to, get to the action phase. So I'm extremely bullish. Started to look at land as well. Yesterday I wrote something about vision. Vision could be big kumbaya idea, big strategy, but lowercase vision is just understanding the path ahead. In Montreal, we always talk about, I think there are places like near the old Hippodrome, Blue Bonnets, Royal Mount could work. I don't think that would be really fair to people in South Shore. I think it creates a bit of friction for people downtown. There was a space near Costco. I actually emailed Costco this morning. I connected to their head of real estate and I said, look, I go, would you be open to building a new Costco? Those buildings that, Costco buildings don't cost that much to build. I'm like, it doesn't really matter to you if you are where you are on Bridge Street or if you're like across the street. If you would be willing to sell that land that your Costco is on, boom, there's the 750,000 square feet up to 1 million, ideally even 1.5 million square feet of space that would house not just a stadium, but the 4C creative, cultural, commercial center that I've kind of outlined, which is really what I think most sports leagues want. It's also what most investors want. I don't think most investors are that interested in just a sports team. I think they look at it more as like it's an area that is, 12 months, there's activity, museums, shops, no shortages of ideas. So really, really bullish. But as I've said it, oh my God, it's just a test of patience because we're talking about what is realistically going to be a 3 to 4 year, timeline. But where am I going? I got nothing better to do.
Well, it's good. It's glad to see that the wheels are in motion and that you've been getting responses from people. That's pretty cool. Let's shift gears, though, to WatchMojo. So we have a couple of items to talk about for 2026, one of them being WatchMojo's music endeavors. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yes. Which ones? Because there's a few. I know we did the album, but which one?
I got MTV WatchMojo music here.
Yeah. We've talked a little bit about WatchMojo and music and events and expanding and WatchMojo 2030, the studio project. So yeah, at a high level, I think WatchMojo is, my mantra to the team is, and to my board and to my investors, to anybody who will listen, is don't expect extraordinary results when you do the ordinary. But to do the extraordinary, then you got to do the ordinary things in an extraordinary fashion, right? So what we have to do, to quote Colin Powell, is before you go out there on the offense, you need to, bolster your defense. So I think the last couple of years, we really bolstered the foundation of the company. we really, really improved all the processes, yada, yada, made sure that the right people were in the right positions on the field, so to speak. And now we just don't want to lose momentum because we entered our third growth phase in our 20-year history, and officially we'll celebrate our 20-year history January 23rd. And it's crazy because we have 2 more members, making it about 10 teammates who have been with us for over 10 years. It's crazy. And we probably have 6 or 7 that have been with us for over 15 years, so it's great
rare.
culture, great team. Yeah. No, so the what I read was more that MTV was shutting down. And it was just a comment about how, you talk about resolutions. So throughout the 2010s, like we had conversations with Time Inc. to take Fortune, Time, Sports Illustrated, and to kind of videofy them, for lack of a better word, just reimagine the brands as video-centric, digital native brands. And when MTV shut down, I was like, it's a shame because WatchMojo, it's more known for movies, TV, gaming, but same way we branched out gaming into Mojo Plays. I had emailed Paramount, Skydance, and I was like, hey, there's the email. I was like, if you guys are going to kill MTV, why don't you license it to us? And then we would basically take all of our music programming. We got thousands of bios and top 10 lists and on all the top artists. But again, sometimes not fake news, but you got to read the fine print. I don't think MTV, at least as of now, has shut down the flagship MTV channel. I think what they shut down was just all of the kind of, for lack of a better word, the derivative secondary channels or, the non-English channels. But it just goes to show that as WatchMojo itself grows, I've talked about how a lot of people come to me sometimes. They're like, oh, WatchMojo, used to watch that when I was younger. I'm busy now. I don't work. And then we kind of win over new fans. Yeah, I don't know. Like, does MTV mean anything to younger generations? It's like SI. We've talked to SI over the years. It's flattering. It's a good challenge. But I'm like, do kids really, even Bleacher Report, even newer brands, think of Barstool. Even that's a brand that's been around for 20 years. So I don't really know if those legacy brands mean as much. Me as a media historian, media, operator. Yeah, I mean, it's great if you were to kind of have a brand like MTV, but at the same time, maybe it is easier to always just start with a clean slate,
Yeah, it's hard for me to say. Maybe I'm off on this, but I kind of feel like the younger generations are not as attached to brands as we once were. It seems to have shifted away from that to some degree.
Yeah, I mean, during the golden era of television, nobody was really like a fan of NBC. They were a fan of Seinfeld. They were a fan of Friends. They were a fan of SNL. And so I think what you saw with the YouTube generation is even when PewDiePie, when he was like the king of YouTube, like before Mr. Beast became the current undisputed king of YouTube, PewDiePie had to deal with
until the next guy comes.
Yeah, well, that's if there is a next guy, because the clutter is hard to cut through.
This is true.
That is, just the reality, I feel. But I remember when PewDiePie had to deal with Maker Studios, and he wanted like to pull people over to Maker.tv. It flopped, So I used to say, ironically, people are still more loyal to YouTube than to creators, even the Mr. Beast, even the PewDiePies. If those guys leave the platform, I really don't think that people are going to follow them to some website. I think, it's like even when Mr. Beast, to his credit, did his deal with Amazon, sure, he got some views, but it's not like people stop watching him on YouTube, right? So I do think people are more loyal to these individual creators than brands, but I still think people are still today more loyal to YouTube than to any single creator. So that's another paradox of this racket.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think with the MTV specific example, though, there is a lot of nostalgia for that brand in particular. And our viewer, Taekwon Williams, hey, Taekwon, what's up? Thanks for joining us. Says, I kind of miss MTV networks like MTV 80s, 90s, and 2000s and Nick Music. So I feel like a lot of people have that kind of little nostalgia bug for brands like MTV that kind of hit their peak and then faded and are kind of on their way out.
Well, I think
kind
it
of
was
like Blockbuster,
innovative. Well, yeah, no, it's innovator's dilemma, right? I mean, if you're
Hmm.
Blockbuster, Netflix is like the plate. You're not interested in that. And if you're MTV, people say music, videos shifted to reality TV. I mean, those are all like details. I think it was more ultimately that the internet was on demand, so people could watch whatever the hell they want, and television just could not really compete with that. So, yeah, I mean, look, if tomorrow Paramount got back to us and was like, yeah, you know what, that's not a bad idea because we're going to cut MTV in a year. If you guys want to run with it, let's figure out the business terms. I think that's compelling, to be honest. I don't want to be a hypocrite, but I think it's more of a corporate profile thing that would be good for us. I don't necessarily think that audiences are going to care. Audiences are going to care about the content. They're going to care about, like, what is it that we're programming to inform and entertain. But
Yeah.
yeah.
So moving
Probability
along,
very low, let's put it that way.
fair enough. Part of what we wanted to do with this episode was kind of examine what the first week of the new year can foreshadow about the rest of the year. And a lot's happened. So we have some United States news, some international news to talk about. So what do you want to start with?
Well, I mean, we could start with the world. Sorry, we could start with the US because I think, as Canadians, we always used to hear that when America sneezes, we catch a cold. And I do
Hmm.
think it's naive to think that, like, Europe is leading anything. I think Europe has, after World War II, passed the baton to America, and Europe has effectively more and more made itself irrelevant. I mean, I love Europe, I love Europeans, but I don't think anybody looks to Europe as they set the agenda. And what's interesting is we do think that China is the leading, the economic superpower of the 21st century. And, you see their military buildup, and obviously they've become what America was in terms of going around the world and helping with infrastructure. But it's crazy that when you think of Trump's second term, you know, despite some of his hardcore fans hoping for a third term, technically the Constitution prevents that, forbids that.
Hmm.
So not going to happen. He really does not care anymore about some of the things that he had to concern himself with in his first term. I think in his first term, what happened is the first 6 months, first year, he still had a lot of like career politicians, people who may not have been loyal to him, but who represented like guardrails and safeguards for him to kind of conduct himself a certain way. And you could argue that he still did whatever the hell we wanted. But in the second term now, I think you're seeing someone that kind of has mastered the DC politics game and still refuses to play by it. That's the more interesting thing as a case study. But, if you look at what happened on the day when Chinese diplomats were in Venezuela, and Venezuela, kind of like Cuba, is under the, obviously, as a communist country, they're under like the China and Russian sphere of influence. So if you think about it, on the very same day that Chinese diplomats were in Venezuela, obviously to talk about oil, to talk about weapons, to talk about whatever, the US sends in, their army, and basically Maduro says kidnapped, America says arrest. We'll leave that to the courts.
Sure.
And they pluck him and his wife. And Maduro was actually sitting there a few days before bragging about how the defense systems that the Islamic Republic of Iran gave Venezuela were going to prevent such a scenario. So you can't really script this. And I mean, as somebody who was born in Iran, who lives in the West, and sometimes sees, these folks who live in the West, they love the liberties, they love the freedoms that are bestowed upon them here. And they basically are fanboys because of like their criticism of American foreign policy, which I think that's fair if you want to criticize foreign policy. But then, while you would never get up and go live in the Islamic Republic of Iran under the mullahs, you fanboy for them. And that to me is shocking. I mean, to me, it's unacceptable. People could do what they want. And so when you saw these, to quote, these leftist, liberal, lunatic losers, as Trump would call them, who are hitting the streets and saying, this is horrible. What has America done? Maduro's this, Maduro's that. I'm like, well, look at the Venezuelans who are singing and chanting, and they're happy. And
Very
I do
different
think,
story. Yeah.
according to the census, I am a white person. So if you and I are two gringos sitting here talking about this, I know Yvonne, our producer. Yvonne, you should probably join us. It would be
Yeah, let's get
weird
him
if
into the
you
Jumping in
conversation.
here. Don't be fooled by the Captain America shield and the metallic shirt. I am very much Colombian living in Mexico. So
what are your thoughts on Maduro?
I think the conversation that I've had ever since this happened is that Maduro wasn't the issue. He needed to go out at one point or another because he was a terrible person, a terrible dictator, and the country is hopefully going to be better off without him. However, what angers, I think, a lot of people, and what the conversation kind of shut down, the moment the conversation kind of shuts down, is when you start saying, yeah, but the US has no plan. So this was all about the oil. And I've seen a lot of posts from the right and saying, yeah, oh, but you only focus on the oil, you don't care about Venezuelans and stuff like that. Of course you do. Of course, of course you can say that I can care about both issues. And to be honest, the track record of the U.S. in Latin America is not great. It's, Honduras, Guatemala,
Anywhere.
Panama, Colombia, everywhere, right? So
in the Middle East, they went into Iraq saying we're going to be liberators and greeted with roses.
Nothing happened. Exactly. And the fact that right now it's so blatantly obvious that they have absolutely no plans for Venezuela, and even the oil companies are like, no, we're hands off. We're not even, we don't even want to play in that playground. I think that's what angers a lot of the people. So yeah, I think that the conversation, because I saw your tweet about, people dancing in the streets and stuff like that, but you look at the footage from Venezuela and they're shooting in the streets and they're hunting people down from one place or the other, from one thought or the other. So if you were against Maduro, they're going to hunt you down. The opposition party is nowhere to be found. Corina Machado, who was the Nobel Prize winner, went on television and said, like Trump, I'll give you the Nobel Prize, dude. Come on. I mean, we need you to do what you say you're going to do. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And these things are going to keep happening. So, and you do get worried because he mentioned the two countries I care for the most, Colombia and Mexico. So I'm kind of between a rock and a hard place here with that.
Don't worry. No, before the army does a 180 and gets to Colombia or Mexico, he's like lining up to probably attack around. So there is a parallel, and that's why I wanted to talk about these things. Very similar, like I honeymooned in Cuba. I love Cuban people. Like, I love all Latin. They're such warm people. I'm not saying this because Yvonne is here. But, I mean, nobody is leaving Miami on a raft and trying to get to Havana. It's like when the Berlin Wall fell, the people from the East ran to the West, not the other way around. So I actually like people who are intellectually honest that could say, yeah, you know what? Not a fan of Maduro, but obviously maybe the way the U.S. went about it. Now, but the problem is, really sad to see that 30 Cuban soldiers effectively died in that operation. But to quote one of the Venezuelans who was interviewed, he's like, why were there Cubans then? If you care so much, it's a foreign force that is on Venezuelan soil. And then Cubans, at least you could argue, are close to us. There's a big body of water separating them, but it's kind of like fellow Latinos, you could argue. Do you think Russia and China were in Venezuela for the arepas recipe, as the Venezuelans said? And I actually think we always oversimplify it, whereas Iraq was 100% oil. No, let's actually break it down. Iraq was 90% oil, 80% oil, but it was also a vendetta because George Bush W's father was apparently on like the hit list of Saddam Hussein. So W wants to make his dad, Papa, happy and finish what Papa Bush didn't complete. So there's always these extra things. So for me, Venezuela is, again, 80% oil. Venezuela has more oil than any other country, but they don't develop it because of incompetence and corruption. So I'm at a point where I'm like, yes. The proceeds should go to the Venezuelan people. Full stop. But if the Venezuelan regime, and Maduro did not win the last election, right? Like he lost the election and he kind of used force to stay in power. So I'm like, at some point, if that government is using force and they're corrupt and they're incompetent, yeah, I don't think we should have this sense of indignation if American ingenuity and American corporations with their expertise go. I'm not condoning the following, but it's fascinating how when Donald Trump tells Chevron, and Chevron is apparently the only company that stayed in Venezuela because of a sanctions waiver, but he basically is using state capitalism by telling Chevron, Exxon, all these companies, they're like, if you want to get back the assets that Chavez and Maduro basically confiscated from you, like assets that legally were yours, but they just nationalized them, he's like, you have to go and invest the billions to get the Venezuelan oil infrastructure back. Which again, I'm like, you know what? It's actually not a bad approach. Like that's at least an economic plan. You could disagree with it, but yes, Trump likes theatrics. You know, he's more of a Hollywood guy, so they don't really have a plan. And I'm similarly worried. Like even I'm secular, I'm not religious at all, but even in Iran, when I hear those opposed to the regime, when I hear the only good mullah, like religious person, is a dead one, again, I'm not religious. Personally, I don't care about religion, but I'm like, I don't like when I hear, one group killing fellow compatriots just because they disagree. So I'm also hoping that whatever happens in Iran does not spill over into retribution and retaliation, because then, an eye for an eye and everybody's blind. So fascinating.
I think the commercial discourse that's what's most worrying. Like the commercial and corporate discourse and the way it's being talked about. I think that's one of the biggest worries, because there's no, and I'm going to sound really, really, really far left, but there's no humane way of talking about these things, there's no, the infrastructure for Venezuela, and we're going to, get back the roads and get back the all this part. It's not that. It's we're going to give you the oil, you're going to do whatever you want with it, and there's absolutely no mention of anything else. And that's something that corporations have done in Latin America for a while. Nestle in Brazil, in Mexico, all these corporations even Canadian mining companies here in Mexico. It was a big debate here because they're strip mining the hell out of the landscape in Mexico. And, it's business and it's innovation and stuff like that, but it's not sustainable and it's not there. So I think it's that, and the fact that it can be replicated, and the ideas that he used to kind of excuse the actions can be replicated somewhere else, like Greenland or Mexico or Colombia. I think it should worry a lot of people. And one thing I did tell my friends, I have a couple of friends that live in the States. They're like, you guys should be super pissed that you guys can't afford healthcare, and here's this guy running Venezuela, So I think that's kind of like where it should go. Like, you should be super angry that this is happening, because he doesn't care. He literally doesn't care, like you said. But yeah, I think that's the general discourse about that, and kind of look at it from both sides, that Maduro did have to go out.
Can I play devil's advocate? Can I play devil's advocate?
Go for it. Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
So why is it then? First of all, this is contrarian, not devil's advocate. This is actually how I feel. I rather if politicians were candid. Like, I rather Trump come out and say it's all about the oil. It's our oil. Americans had rights and we're going to get them back, which to me, I'm like, well, it was originally not your oil, but okay, let's set that aside. I rather that than like bullshitting people both in the US and like at the time in Iraq and elsewhere to talk about freedoms and all that, when it is more economic incentive. So I personally don't mind it if politicians at least are candid with their, no matter how, distasteful. I think it's better, because then the electorate can make decisions when they vote and not think it's about religious.
I mean, I think that's, go for it. Yeah, go.
No, but the devil's advocate part is like, if you are concerned about Americans not having like health or infrastructure crumbling, but you go and say, well, what's happening in Minnesota with the Somali fraudsters and the daycares, you are branded a racist. When I'm like, yeah, I don't care if they're from Somalia or from or from Sweden. It's just wrong, right? Like if at face value, prima facie, that is happening, where they're saying we have 1,000 students to get a credit per child, but really there's no kids. Let's just like simplify it. That should outrage Americans. But if you raise your hand, you're branded racisto. Whereas I'm like, yeah, bullshit. It's not racist. It's these people are criminals, regardless of where they're from. And so that seems to be problematic. But when I see, yes, the leftists, I grew up as a more Democrat, but I don't see how the Democrats should be anywhere near the White House ever again for a foreseeable future. When I see the Democrats out there, in these protests that clearly are organized by some foreign forces, because each one of those posters costs hundreds of dollars. I don't see the poor struggling students having the money to go print 300 of those posters that are perfect, that a year ago said free Gaza, 6 months ago said some other slogan. Today it's saying lay your hands off Venezuela, Maduro is a saint or whatever. So I'm like, why is it racist, or why is it like bad to criticize all of that behavior which harms America? Because to me it's like a cliche. At the end of the day, Venezuelans will probably be better off with what Trump did, not condoning how they did it, but there's no like pretty cute way. The supreme leader of Iran, Ali Khamenei, the Shia martyrdom complex is massive. I myself a couple nights ago retweeted saying, hey, if it is true that he's going to flee to Russia, that is going to be huge. And people are like, Ash, your takes are usually good, but this guy's not going to leave. I'm like, it's not impossible. It's unlikely. But I don't support any foreign forces hitting Iranian soil. But at some point, if this thing keeps killing Iranians, I don't care. I'll look the other way if somehow someone's just sent to martyrdom on a one-way ticket fast track, if it means less Iranian lives are killed, right? So I kind of look at it as where 2026 is you do have this very vocal minority of people that are like, Trump is bad, Maduro, this was illegal. They don't know the history. They don't really know the details. I do feel like the left is really making themselves like unvotable now. I do think there's this silent majority that is probably happy that Maduro's gone, that is happy that Donald Trump, he doesn't have a plan, he likes theatrics, but no Americans were killed, right? Like it was like relatively
I think there were a couple of injuries in a helicopter they got. Yeah.
Okay, they did. Okay, but no casualties.
I don't think so, no.
Yeah.
But
So
80 civilians, but yeah.
No, which I condone, but that shouldn't happen. But when I read the Cuban, which I hate to see anybody die, but I'm like, well, why were there Cubans in Venezuela? Why does that make it all right? The Venezuelans probably want the freaking Cubans to leave so they can have their own agency. So I just feel it's this like intellectual dishonesty that, it's okay to criticize one stuff, but even though there are clear benefits to stakeholders who benefit if Maduro is gone, like we're going to ignore that. Like, so I personally feel like the left is increasingly untouchable. They are increasingly at odds with American society. But guess what? I could say these things. It's not even like I'm like, I respect individual. I respect human life. But a lot of people can't say it because they're afraid they're going to get labeled a racist and they get canceled. So that's really.
I think for 2026, I think what's going to happen is because there's a lot of noise on both sides. You say the left is like becoming increasingly like unvotable, but I think also the far right is kind of like stepping into the same pile of shit that the left is stepping into, because you have someone like Stephen Miller go on CNN saying our hemisphere and we are the superpower, and we're like, this dude is like straight out of a movie. And again, people on the right are seeing that, are going like, I don't know, I think for 20, just to close out the idea, I think for 2026, my hope at least that people start seeing through both sides of the bullshit and start figuring out for themselves what they need and what can they vote for and what actual power they have for one side or the other. So hopefully, I don't know.
I alienate everybody because I always point out weaknesses and like where each side is wrong. I say this, I both understand the frustration that, say, American politicians would have if the Islamic Republic tries to build an outpost for Hezbollah for the IRGC in Venezuela, which is in the Western Hemisphere. It's in the Southern Hemisphere. But I can imagine America's like, we don't want a repeat of Cuba. Now, I also go, well, why does America have all these military bases in the Middle East? So I like, this is why for 20 years I would criticize it. I was like, okay, America wants to export democracy, even though the foreign policy goal was always to secure natural resources around the world. So as you said, I agree with you, Ivan. It's the hypocrisy on both sides. Yeah. But I don't think that changes the end game, which is right now, if I was a betting man, and I'm not, I think Marco Rubio has lapped J.D. Vance as the likely 2028 Republican
candidate.
Like hands down, Vance actually is more like, the Bay Area kind of, Peter Thiel puppet. Initially, that was like what people accused him of. He proved like adept at politics. You could see, okay, give him 4 years as VP, it was like his to lose. But I think because of the Venezuela operation and obviously the Cuban link and his passion for that project, I do think Rubio's going to get more and more, kind of the spotlight. And I think if they don't kill one another, Vance and Rubio, and in the run up to 28, I think that's going to be probably the ticket if they could coexist. Yeah. And whereas I thought initially it would be Vance and Rubio, I now think it's going to be Rubio and Vance if Vance is, okay with that ego-wise. But yeah, no, and I mean, I don't like a lot. I mean, Trump has many flaws, as they all do, but for someone who is tired of hearing politicians talk, I do like his fix this problem or I will fix it for you kind of approach to things. Mm-hmm. I personally am very fine with the way they did the Maduro thing because I listened to the Venezuelans. And as an Iranian, I know people are like, I can't believe you would be okay. Yeah, I don't like Israel hitting Iran, nor do I like Iran hitting Israel. I'm an anti-violence guy. But considering America, even though ultimately it's the Iranians' fault that they ended up with the Islamic Republic, considering the West enabled all of that, the Guadalupe Conference, Iran-Contra, Khomeini coming to Iran on Air freaking France, I do think America has a bit of a responsibility to rectify this scourge that has basically sent Iran back to the 7th century, right? So I kind of I'm like the end does justify the means, in my humble opinion. Not politically correct, but it absolutely does. If Khamenei falls, the regime also has to go. It's not really just one person. The celebrations in Tehran, the celebrations in Mashhad and Tabriz and Kermanshah are going to dwarf what you saw in Venezuela. Mm-hmm. It's a country of 90 million people that have been under the boot of these clerics who have an ideology. And I have no problem with Islam, the religion, but Islam is a political movement cloaked as a, and I could say it, I'm Muslim. Like, who am I offending? But the problem is, like, why is the BBC not covering Iran? Because the BBC is either afraid or they're sad, which I don't think they're sad, but they probably just don't want to offend all the Muslims that are in the UK because this is Iran rejecting religion, the religion of Islam. So it's crazy. I honestly did not think any of this would happen. I thought Trump would be like, we don't care about Iran. But seeing him take out Maduro, I'm now quite convinced that all this military buildup is to set, a strike against, not Khamenei. I don't think they'll martyr him, but I think it is going to go after some of these regime security apparatus that is killing Iranians still each day, and I can't believe I'm been pushed to say this, but that was always my red line. I didn't care about Iran's foreign policy. If you like somebody or not, I don't like the foreign policy of any country, but stop the killing of Iranians. It's crazy. And the world isn't even covering it. Where's Greta Thunberg? Where is she? You know what I mean? Like, why is it? So you're seeing that hypocrisy. I'm all for the people of Venezuela. I'm all for the people of Iran. And if it takes America to come do something, so be it. I'll look the other way.
I think the final question is if that is the goal. I mean, if ultimately that is the goal, you could actually make a really solid case on all those actions. But that is where the doubt lies, or the general doubt, is that the actual goal, or is it just destabilization and control? But
So the European countries, I think, don't care, despite all their nonsensical, values of centuries ago and the Enlightenment and all that. I think the EU is like, well, we don't have the power to do anything, and if the status quo, Iran does whatever it does, let them be. We can't change anything. I think the difference is, frankly, Trump. He's like, okay, if I'm not going to get a peace prize, then I want my legacy to be that who, Biden upped the bounty on Maduro, I think, from 10 million to 25 million. So the Democrats were fine with taking out Maduro. I mean, if you put a $25 million bounty on somebody's head, you're basically saying you want him dead or alive, but you're kind of, it's pretty obvious what you're saying. But why is it that these Democrats that I supported all my life all of a sudden have this sense of indignation? And it's funny because I joked that I said, I wonder if the gals on The View are going to have canceled their programming to have a week-long vigil for Maduro. But thankfully, Ana Navarro, who's a Latina, she's a Hispanic gal, she was like, no, I'm glad he left. And you could have these seemingly mutually exclusive positions that I'm happy he left. But yeah, maybe the way the U.S. went about it. But in the end, it's moot. There was no other way to do this without the U.S. doing what they did, So I can't believe it. I like to be objective. Trump, for his objectives, gets really high grades. He's doing the things that all these other politicians have talked about, but he's doing it. It's a bit like when people criticize Bibi Netanyahu, who's a bit of a sociopath, like all politicians, and 80% of CEOs are sociopaths as well. Like politicians are narcissistic sociopaths. But I always say, Bibi is not the leader of the Arabs. He's not the leader of Canada. He's the leader of Israel. So all that matters is how Israelis and Jewish people feel about him. That's who he's accountable for. So Trump, he doesn't care about the lefties. He doesn't care about what Europe thinks of him. He will go down as I loved Obama. I really liked Obama. But in hindsight, Obama just continued the disastrous policies of W. Bush. And Obama and Biden are the ones that sent billions to the mullah so they could keep killing Iranians, just so that maintain the status quo. Whereas the most popular name in Iran is going to be Donald. They're going to be like, Donald actually stepped up and did something.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that is coming out of this whole Trump thing is he is very much exposing all the loopholes and all the safeguards that they thought they had in place for these kind of situations. So I don't know. Hopefully, there's a little bit of change in that end as well. Yeah.
Well, I feel like I got a crash course in all of this from you guys. You remember when I said that my New Year's resolution was to consume less? Well, that applies to the news too. So most of my knowledge has come from this conversation.
All right, I'm going to go back to producing, guys. Keep it going. All right. Thank you for that.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks,
Yvonne. This is going to be fascinating, and obviously, pray for the people of Venezuela that doesn't get off the rails. Pray for the people of Iran. Just pray for people. I always go criticize organizations, criticize parties, but you always want to be on the side of people. And it's very disappointing that a lot of these lunatics on the left who were bashing many things and protesting many things, they've been awfully silent about, the right side of history. And that's history will remember that. And it is what it is.
What this makes me think of, and I mean, like I understand it's not a fair comparison, but like there's a lot of bad world leaders out there. So are we going to see a future one day where some country goes into North Korea and takes away Kim Jong-un or whoever his predecessor or successor is and liberates the North Koreans and stuff like that? I feel like there's a lot.
Here's the thing. One of the reasons why like Russia and China and Iran and a lot of these countries under the Axis, they probably looked at that operation that the US pulled off, impressed, envious, and fearful, right? Like if Russia could do that to Zelensky, yeah, maybe they would do it. If Samsung could send a SEAL team to North Korea, they would consider it. It's that they can't.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of these people who are whining, it's because they can't, which in a way is actually, not to go back to the expos, I understand a lot of people, not a lot. I understand why some people may not like that I threw myself into the ring. You know, citizen in the Man in the Arena by Roosevelt. That's a great speech. You know, like people can talk, people could say, but in the end, you got to throw yourself in the mix. But people may not like what Trump did. And not that I'm comparing myself to Trump. Some people may not like the way I'm going about bringing the Expos back, but they're not important in that sense.
So
You
they're
know,
not
like
doing it.
they're not doing it. They're
Yeah.
not doing it, right? And like as an entrepreneur, like I'm very coachable, I'm very respectful, but entrepreneurs, we don't ask for permission. So Donald Trump doesn't actually, okay, you could argue he needs congressional authority for certain things, but history will judge him as somebody who did what everybody else talked about doing.
Absolutely. Let's end this on a lighter note. I enjoyed this tweet that you shared about how, you know, what is this? This
Which
guy,
one? I
this
saw a lot.
sandwich, the sandwich,
Oh,
the Philly cheesesteak.
yeah, the
Can you set that up for us? How private
no,
investment doesn't always make things better.
well, it's not just private equity. Okay, so this is yeah, I go, how can we be helpful? Don't be stupid. So this guy's talking about Jersey Mike's. So Jersey Mike's sold to Blackstone, a private equity fund. Smart guys. I really am not picking on Blackstone. I'm not even picking on private equity. It's as a general thing. When somebody buys an asset, I don't understand for the life of me. Like, yeah, they pay a lot. They pay a premium. So they got to increase revenues. They got to cut costs. That I get. I get that. I'm a business guy. But I don't understand how you think it's not going to shoot you in the foot. Like, do you think subs are that unique and demand for Jersey Mike's is that elastic that if you clearly don't put enough meat in it, or if you charge too much, or if it goes from a 12-inch to an 11-inch kind of sub kind of dynamic, do you really think your clients are going to tolerate that and maybe once or twice, but not go eat somewhere else? Like, I'm very lucky. We're very lucky. We have a private equity fund. Sure, they want us to grow revenues. They want us to be, you know, on the lookout for cost control and all that. But if they were to come tomorrow and be like, you know what, flip a switch, only go AI, get rid of all your costs of, you know, labor. First of all, I would push back, but to their credit, they've never said that. But it's just like baffling to me how these smart people think that this pays off, you know? So it's just, when I saw this, you know, and investors are always like, how could we be helpful? I'm like, how could you be helpful? Don't be stupid. Don't shoot yourself in the foot. So yeah, so, you know, it's sometimes you got to be long-term greedy, especially if you're buying an asset. I almost joke, imagine if like, you know, like when I started WatchMojo, investors would be like, okay, give us a 5-year revenue plan, give us a 3-year historical performance. And I was like, we're in year 1. We have no historical performance. And in 5 years, I'm like, I could build a model. But it's the same thing. I almost want to be like, investors should only be able to say, how could we be helpful if you submit 5 times you've actually been helpful? Who, you know, give me your references.
Yeah, track record.
Yeah, what's your track record on this? So it's almost like if you buy an asset, I mean, obviously this doesn't make sense, but I'm like, the brand goes into an escrow. It goes into a trust. If you, after 2 years, don't ruin the experience for the most important stakeholder, which is your clients, then in 2 years, you get the brand. But if not, the consumers can take the brand and go start their own Jersey Mike's subs, and you just go sit in the corner because you ruined it for yourself. Anyway, unlikely to happen, but not a crazy idea.
Let that be a lesson to all of us in 2026. All right, Ash. Well, it's been good. We'll pick it back up next week as we continue working through this new year. Thanks for the time today, and thanks for everybody who watched. And we'll see you all next week.
Peace.